Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. Dr. Larry Arnn, last radio hour of the week. He's back. He looks the same. It's great that you look this good and you put your tie on, Dr. Arnn. Last week we finished, and you were talking to the freshmen. On my outline, Chapter 7 of The World Crisis, there is a quote from Pericles. The great impediment to action is not discussion, but want of knowledge, which is gained by discussion preparatory to action. Rarely, in our many years of doing the Hillsdale Dialogue, has the transition from last week to this week been so easily. Because what Pericles said that Churchill quoted 100 years ago mattered to the freshmen you spoke to about social media. So would you go back to where we were last week and tell us what you told the freshmen about social media?
Well, a college is a special example of something that's important to everyone, and that is way better to stop and think a lot, right? And the young, they need that. They need it because they're ignorant, and they do it because the most important things from the point of view of urgency and stuff, that's in the future. Really great for young people to stop and read a bunch of old books. Hard for them to have the patience to do that, by the way. So the swirl of social media cuts against that. It's the reason it's such an annoyance to me that you want to talk about public affairs, because sometimes, and we do. But I follow public affairs, but I have to kind of bone up to be what I think might be good enough to do it on the air, talking to a lot of people. Because I have a really rich life, and I just talked to the freshmen for the 24th time in my life, and it's wonderful and great, and I told them not to spend their lives doing that. And they won't, mostly. And, so here's what happens on social media. And you can do it anonymously, which breeds irresponsibility. But if you do it in your own name, then you take a position, and then it can get quoted all over the world. And liked and disliked, and, lots of dislikes hurts people's feelings. And so it's like a discipline system. And then the power of the media company to filter it and alter it is awesome, dangerous, right? And they use it like crazy. So it's just not a good world. And the other thing is it's so wrapped up that it's one reason why our partnership has been productive, in my opinion. We talk mostly about beautiful old things for the sake of knowing them. And we talk quite a lot about what they might imply for our situation today, which is, by the way, how the mind works. It has to work that way. And then we talk about stuff going on right now, but you can't keep me on that subject very long. I always bring up the past or the eternal. Kids need to do that because if they, like I told them, it's probably the greatest advice that I had from a teacher, and it was the first advice I got from Harry Jaffa in the first class I took with him. And it was Aristotle's Ethics. And I was green as a goose, just showed up in town. I was given the honor of picking him up. He couldn't remember who I was. A little deflating. And then we go down to class. And my first graduate class, this man who's famous for his knowledge of this book. And here's how he started. I can repeat it. He said, when people get old like me, I'm now, by the way, considerably older than he was then, they make a list of the 100 greatest books. Life is too short to read 100 books, if they're great. I have a list of the 3 greatest books. I told this to the freshmen. I said, Plato's Republic would be on any such list. Aristotle's Politics would require interpretation to be fully relevant to the modern world. Seemed to be excluding it. He said, Shakespeare. Just said the word. And then he said, I had many classes with him on Shakespeare too. They were awesome. He said, at the end of the symposium, Socrates says that a poet will arise who can do both tragedy and comedy, and Shakespeare invented a third thing, the history plays. And then he held up the Nicomachean Ethics, and he said, this is a perfect book, and our plan in this class is to read this book. And I told him that story, and I said, so today, first of all, every freshman, every admitted student in June gets a copy of that book from the college with a requirement that they read books 1 and 2, but with the encouragement that they should read it all. And then I said, if you're serious about being at Hillsdale College, here's what it requires. You have to commit that you're going to pick 1 or 2, or at most 3 things, and you're going to know as much about them by the time you die as anybody alive. And you have to, this book would be great. It just so happens that this book sings to me. I love that book, and I have always loved it. Every time I've ever read it, I love it. It's complicated, but it's beautiful. But something else will sing to you. And that one, and maybe a couple of others, you're going to know them for a long time. And they all have to be things that teach you about the only things of which you can have knowledge, which is things that never change.
And if I am pressed, I am going to say, and we are excluding Scripture from this conversation. Dr. Arnn and I have had this conversation before. It's revealed. It's Jerusalem. It's not Athens. If I'm pressed, I always bring up Plutarch. But I may make room for Volume 1 of The World Crisis now, because it is a window into a mind that is not open very often. I mean, he wrote it all down, and he's at the center of events, and he's a young man. How old is he when he writes, when he acts this way? Is he 35 when he's the First Lord of the Admiralty?
So 26, and he became First Lord in 1911. So 26 and 11, he's 37.
He's 37 years old. Wow.
Yeah, and we encourage, I'll repeat it now, people, when they read this chapter, to read it as a primer on how to do it. Because that is actually, you read history to get a sense of beautiful actions and the contrary. And history is cool to read because it's finished. So like opinions about the Ukraine war they can only be provisional because it's still going on and hard to know everything going on in the present, right? Whereas opinions about the Peloponnesian War, that happened a long time ago.
Now, what is relevant right now from Chapter 7 is that when there is a committee on imperial defense put together by the people, elected by the people, led by Henry Asquith, and Churchill's in the cabinet and Lord George is in the cabinet, one of the first things that Churchill does is go to Asquith. And we've talked about both of these men in the course of our Great Contemporary series, and says, bring in Balfour. Bring him in. And he's on the other side. And because he had stepped down, he is brought in. There is a lesson in that for today, Dr. Arnn.
Oh, yeah.
Explain what you think that lesson is.
That's the solution, so far as one exists, to the problem that's the center of Plato's Republic. He says the city will be miserable until the philosophers are kings, and they won't be, because why would they? They have better things to do. And anyway, we don't know who they are. We can't make them. So how do you get the best people to rule? That's one of the fundamental political problems. And so if you have a healthy republic, which we do not these days, by the way, then at key moments, because, philosophers don't become kings unless their names are Abraham Lincoln or Winston Churchill or several of the founders, then they will pick the best. And they won't let anything low get in the way.
When we come back, we're going to add to that list of the founders Washington's cabinet. It's not on my agenda, but Washington knew how to pick them. We'll be right back. Hillsdale.edu for this and every other Hillsdale Dialogue for Imprimis and the application you want for next year. Stay tuned.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Larry Arnn leads Hillsdale College. He has for a long time. 24 freshman classes have come. Hillsdale.edu for all that, and he has a capacity to pick them. By that I mean he has a capacity to bring to the college people of talent and put them on the faculty so that it has grown into a huge success story, which has now attracted the enmity of the ruling class in America because it is against the idea that there ought to be a ruling class in America. So it is only natural, by the way, that you've gotten into their target. And I saw another attack on you this week. I said, boy, oh boy, Arnn is doing something because he's drawn all the aircraft fire. Now, in this segment, I want to talk about the fact that Winston Churchill loved war games at the Admiralty. You know who else does? Congressman Gallagher. You know who else does? Tom Cotton. And these are people that you identified very early on in their career as being smart and worthy of investing in. How do you do that? I mean, not you, but how does anybody do that going forward in putting together a government? Because a lot of people are facile, and I'm particularly glib. You wouldn't want to give me any power, but glib is not what we're looking for here. Glib may be the opposite of what we're looking for here.
Yeah, there are many important things you have done and could do. I can't think of a good insult to stick in there, but that's true. Anyway, my favorite Greek word, I don't know why, I like the way it sounds, is spoudios, a person of serious moral worth. And
Spoudios?
Spoudios, yeah, it's a really great word. And there's some others that are really awesome too. But to recognize that in people, you have to try to be that. And you become that by living your life seriously. And you do that by making your choices seriously and by equipping your mind. You form your character through your choices. And that's a very beautiful part of Aristotle. He says that human freedom is located in this fact, he says. And everybody's got it. I mean, very few people lead such distorted lives outside their control that they never get a chance to be serious, but they're not many. And almost anything can be overcome. We have a kid in our freshman class, and he had never seen an automatic toilet except on the way to Hillsdale, and had seen very few indoor toilets of any kind. And he showed up here, and he hardly knows how to dress. He's brilliant. He's from Uganda. And how'd we get him? I don't even know.
Dr. Arnn, I had a freshman roommate in 1974 who had never dined in a restaurant. And my parents just thought that was astonishing.
When our son, our younger son, who's about to go into the Marine Corps, he did his stint in the Army and decided he wants to do something harder, so he's going to be an officer in the Marine Corps. But when he graduated from boot camp in the Army, Penny and I went down there to celebrate with him, and we picked up a kid who's a bunkmate and took him around for the day and took him to the PX. The big thing is, the Army makes a killing off the PX and we bought him some stuff and we took him to dinner. And he's an American in the United States Army. He'd never eaten in a restaurant. And
Isn't that remarkable?
He'd never had anybody, he was confused. He'd never had anybody buy anything for him. And he was whispering to Tony. And I heard Tony say, "Don't worry about it." So you see, Aristotle says that is not crippling. Because just think about that young man in the Army. He knew that was generosity and well meant, you see, and he admired it, even if he was taken aback by it.
Larry, my roommate told my parents at the end of the dinner, said, "That was powerfully nice of you." He's a Southern boy. I'm not going to tell you where he's from. I don't want people to know it. I don't want to embarrass him. "That was powerfully nice of you. That was as well as I've eaten." And so he intuited the same thing you just mentioned. Nobody taught him that he should say thank you, but he did.
And Aristotle's claim is that we know all that by nature. By the way, he even claims, I won't do that argument right now, that can I hold it up? This is a cup. It's a Yeti cup. They're pretty good. And how do we know it's a cup when there's so many different cups? Nobody teaches us. We see the being of it, and the being of a thing and the good of a thing are the same thing. That's what he says. And that means the fact that we can talk means we know better and worse. Now he says, we form ourselves when we choose, not when we act. Like I know the head of the Medal of Honor Society today, Pat Brady, Medal of Honor winner, extremely brave man. And I just had a long talk with him a 3 weeks ago.
Tell us about that after. Don't go anywhere. I want to hear about the Medal of Honor recipient from Dr. Arnn, because they are extraordinarily rare people. And if you ever run into one, you want to take them to dinner and talk to them. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn, and we'll talk about that and close blockade versus far-off blockade. Really, it all comes together. Stay tuned to the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. All things Hillsdale, including every prior dialogue. And we did a whole series on the ethics. We did a whole series on the politics. We did a whole series on the Republic, and you can go find them at hillsdale.edu. Type in Hillsdale Dialogue and the ethics, and you'll find it. Dr. Arnn, remind me again of the name of the Medal of Honor recipient and in which
His name
war.
is Pat Brady. He's the head of the Medal of Honor Society right now. And he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. And his job was rescuing people he called patients, wounded soldiers. And, I understand, I've been told that he's under consideration for a second Medal of Honor, because the thing that he did over and over. And that is, they'd shoot his helicopter out from under him, and he'd go find another one and go back and help fix them if there wasn't one ready to go. In other words, go risk his life. And, that means that he lived in mortal peril for hours every week for years. And so I got to talking to him, and I said, we got to talking about Aristotle, and I said, Aristotle's claim, general, he's a general, retired now, is that the choosing to go and do that is more formative of your character than the terror and the hours spent doing it. Because that's where you make your commitment. And life is good, and Heroism is good, and you got to choose between them. That's what hard choices are. You choose a higher good and lose a lower one, or you accept a lesser evil and suffer a worse one. And if you do that in the name of the beautiful, which is the highest kind of good, then you have made a mark. The word character comes from a Greek word that means to etch or engrave. And that's how you form your soul.
How many Medal of Honor recipients have you sat down and chatted with? They're all the same, by the way. They're extraordinary. They're all extraordinary.
4 or 5.
Or at what point in their lives they were. How many?
4 or 5. Because I was just with General Brady, I know that there are 64 of them alive right now.
I only knew one of them, Bill Barber, whom you may have known because he was in Orange County and the hero of the Chosin Reservoir. 13 Medal of Honors were awarded as a result of the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir. I just finished a book called This Kind of War, which is about the Korean War. And I don't know anything about the Korean War, so it was all new to me. And I knew Bill Barber, but I didn't know him because I didn't know what he'd done until I read this book. And I'm in awe of what he did. And I'm not going to go into it, but like your friend, we actually don't know what they did because it goes on for a long period of time. It's not like they do one thing like fall on a grenade, although that has happened and awards have been received as a result of that. But they choose courage again and again and again. It's really a remarkable thing. Churchill probably did this over and over again. But I got to ask you about this chapter. We're in chapter 7 because there's an astonishing thing. And I wanted to ask you about this. I committed myself to ask you about this. He and Lord Kirchner argue for 2 years about what they're going to do if war starts. And Churchill says, we're going to keep 2 divisions at home out of our 6, or the Germans can invade and beat us. And Kirchner says, no, we're going to send all 6 to Europe right away. And they argue for 2 years, and they argue, and they argue, and they argue. And then the war comes, and they both change their minds instantly. Kirchner says, keep 2 back, and Churchill send all 4. So it's not in the changing of the mind that there is either greatness or not greatness. It's in the willingness to do so, I think. That's what I take away from this. What do you read in that?
Well, the greatness also consists in being right. And, who was right? What was the right thing to do, ultimately? Well, those 2 extra divisions did have a big impact on the war. We're going to talk about that, especially when we talk about the Battle of the Marne, which my colleague Richard Langworth won't shut up about.
And I'm glad. By the way, he has got me underlining everything on the Battle of the Marne because I doggone know that Richard is listening, and I've got to get it right.
Yeah, he's really great and also annoying. He's listening to this, of course. That was a very important moment, and it changed a lot of things. You have to remember that there's a time, I know of only one day in Winston Churchill's life, when he did some things that altered the course of history decisively. None of them happened in the First World War, because the things that he set out to do, ultimately he didn't really get them done, because he wanted the Navy to win the war. And if it couldn't, he wanted the tank to win the war. He wanted a decisive victory and cheap, right? And it was very costly. It didn't go very well. And, the Second World War didn't go very well for Britain. Britain lost its greatness in these 2 wars.
Yeah.
And so it, Churchill's life, anybody's life, by the way, has tragedy in it. And, in this world, on this earth, it's a lot of tragedy. Everybody has it. We all will if we haven't yet. So Churchill had a lot of that, right? And so what's wonderful about this book is that, first of all, it's very exciting. If you like to read about war, read this. War's exciting to read about. Read about battles, read about what people did. That's great. Just a spectacle that is instructive. But then, because Churchill is writing it, because he was a phronemos, they call it in the Greek, a man of practical wisdom and eloquence too, he can explain how he thought things through. And there's a pattern there that is extremely instructive. There's an old saw among graduate students that you may write a good dissertation or a bad dissertation, but what you write it about, you will become that. And so I probably think a lot like Winston Churchill because I know all this. And
well, that's interesting. He wrote this, and his career is still unfolding. He writes this when he has future in front of him. So he's aware that it will matter in his future career when he knows there is another war coming. In fact, he's not quite certain there's another war coming, but things are going badly in Europe in the interwar period. And he writes on page 114, once you are at war, the task is definite and all dominating. Whatever may be your surmises about the enemy or the future, your own action is circumscribed within practical limits. You live in a world of reality where theories are constantly being cured by experiment. Resultant facts accumulate and govern to a very large extent the next decision. Well, he's made a decision to write about what he did, and it's going to affect what he gets to do. That's why this book is so fascinating. It's the most important man of the 20th century in the middle of his career writing about what he did right and wrong, aware that he wants to do it again. No, I am unaware of any other book like this.
Yeah, he didn't want to do it again. He tried to fight that and stop it, but he was in another way he wanted to, but he was aware that he might have to. This quote by Pericles at the beginning, you read, you think things through so you're ready, and then you start learning. But if you hadn't thought things through, you couldn't learn so fast or be ready. And another thing is, it's something I believe very much, and I even think, if you're lucky in your friends and teachers, you can never remember who thought of what. But I may be the one who understood that it was in the Dardanelles that Winston Churchill learned how to organize the government for the Second World War, because he changed everything, because he saw that go wrong. And one of the few places where he thought that the British Constitution was inferior to the American Constitution was the appointment of a commander-in-chief, because then somebody can make a decision. And Britain doesn't have that. It's cabinet government, right? And among the many things, we'll get to it. But and so Churchill, another way to read this book is The Education of Winston Churchill. He's learning.
Hold that. We're going to come right back to that, because that is exactly the point I take away from this, is that he's getting the Dardanelles decides everything in World War II, whether or not people know that. Stay tuned. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn.
Hey, it's Scott Bertram. If you haven't yet, now would be a good time to check out the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. It's over at podcast.hillsdale.edu. What's there? Free nationwide access to all of Hillsdale's podcast content. That includes shows like the Hillsdale Dialogues, the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, the Larry P. Arnn Show, and now, new Imprimis. You can listen to any of those programs wherever you are and whenever you want, and it's always free. So find out more about all of our shows at podcast.hillsdale.edu. You can subscribe to any program you want. New episodes will come right to your device, or grab the Hillsdale College Podcast Network Superfeed, and you'll be the first to get access to all of the content posted on the site. If you want to come close to stepping inside a classroom here at Hillsdale College, well, the Hillsdale College Podcast Network is for you. Check it out at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome back, America. We are only in Chapter 7, and I can spend the rest of my life doing a chapter a week in this book. Dr. Arnn, the Dardanelles, let's assume we have some Steelers fans listening. They don't know what it is. Would you summarize it for people? Because it's not yet come up in the book. We've talked about it in the past, and it matters. It's all about the Dardanelles.
Yeah, well, the best way to explain it, first of all, where is it? It's at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. It's the inlet into the Black Sea. And at various times in history, it's been surrounded by Constantinople and then Turkey. Now it's Turkish on one side and Greek on the other, I think. Just there. I can't remember who's on the other side. So the point is, there's this narrow straits, and there's two sets of them. The narrow strait, the straits of the Dardanelles, and then there's the Sea of Marmara, which is a bigger place. And then there's another strait that goes into the Black Sea. And when you're in the Black Sea, you can get up to Kiev and join the Ukraine war if you want to. Or in these years, you could join hands by sea with Russia, your ally, and you can cooperate most closely. And then a lot of that land is behind the big German army. And what happened in the First World War was it was a big learning experience for everybody involved, because firepower had become so great that the one on defense had a big advantage. So the war is very fluid right at the beginning, and Germany took a lot of territory, and then it's fluid again at the end when two things happened. Germany got reinforced by bringing 2 million soldiers from the Eastern Front because Russia collapsed, which Germany helped to make happen, put the Bolsheviks in. But then they moved, right? But then in the First World War, any army that was on the offensive for a long time would eventually break. They all did. They just couldn't go anymore. There were mutinies. The German army was starting to mutiny in 1918. And then the Americans were coming in, and they saved the day. And the German army collapsed so suddenly that they didn't get pushed all the way back. Now, in between those two fluid times, there's trenches that go from the Alps to the sea. There's no way around them. And if you go over them, you're going to have an extremely high body count.
Millions of people die trying to gain miles of ground.
That's right. And usually losing it the next day. And they tore the heck out of the ground and each other. And they didn't change things very much for about 4 years. So Churchill was looking for a way around. And he's got this Navy, and he wants it to make the difference. And so the idea is born. We will go into all that. But there are debates about how to go around. And the British had been interested for a long time in taking some islands off the German coast, either in the Baltic or on the other side. And Churchill liked that for a long time. The island he liked the best was called Borkum. And they thought if they could take an island and put a bunch of stuff there and defend it with their navy, then they could land troops anytime they wanted to in Germany behind the German lines. Break up those trenches, right? Well, the way that was finally adopted, and Churchill was not the first, Fisher actually came around to this idea before Churchill did, was to go all the way down through the Mediterranean and then force by ships. One school of thought by ships alone, one school of thought ships and troops. They eventually tried both. And join hands with the Russians and get the capacity to put major armies in the Black Sea, reinforce the Russians, they hadn't fallen yet, and complicate the lives of Germany endlessly. And so that was tried. And the point about it was, I can quote the passage in particular. This is Churchill. Wars are won by a combination of slaughter and maneuver. The greater the general, the more he contributes in maneuver, and the less he extracts in slaughter. I'll paraphrase from here. If war is only the dreary process of exchanging a life for a life, then generals do not deserve the esteem they enjoy. So see, he's trying to find another way. He's trying to save his country. And it's an example of the richness of his soul, that he's not, Churchill was dead a long time now, and so and he's very important, and so there's waves of the way people portray him. And so one recurring theme is warmonger. He just liked war. He did like war in a way. He was very good at it, but also he was afraid of it, and he was always trying to mitigate its cost.
And when we come back next week, we're getting close to the opening shots, but we're not there yet. We're a couple of years away. But even now, he's trying to prepare for what is coming, and I hope everyone is thinking about China is thinking the same way. How do you prevent it from starting or winning it quickly if it does? Dr. Larry Arnn, thank you so much. Hillsdale.edu. Every Hillsdale Dialogue is there, and you can sign up for an imprimis, and you can get your application.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.